I love action movies, from Rambo to Terminator. These films had a profound influence on my interests. Now, video games based off of these franchises weren't usually good, so I mostly ignored them even as a fan. Sure, some of these movies were a little hokey, and that typically makes for a solid video game, especially from this era, which is partly why it's taken me this long to check out Die Hard Trilogy on the original PlayStation. I love Die Hard. It's probably my favorite action movie ever. If you haven't seen it, go watch it after you finish this video. I promise you won't be disappointed. But anyways, the Die Hard series for a while wasn't too corny. It just seemed like a guy making the best of a bad situation. Wrong time, wrong place kind of thing. They had a great cast of characters, friend or foe, that made the entire plot seem more believable. Nobody was too comically evil or anything like that. No, we knew everyone's intentions, and how they conducted themselves proved that. With all that said, that sort of explains my mindset going into today's video. So without further delay, let's get to it. Die Hard Trilogy released on August 31st, 1996 for the PlayStation, and on December 31st, 1996 for Sega Saturn and PC. The game was developed by Probe Entertainment and published by Fox Interactive. Today's footage will be captured from the PlayStation 1 version. Die Hard Trilogy has the distinction of being one of the few games I know of that features 3 distinct games in one, and each has its own game genre as well. Die Hard is a third-person shooter, Die Hard 2 is a light gun shooter, and Die Hard with a Vengeance is a driving game. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to tackle these in chronological order, one at a time. So Die Hard kicks off in the basement of the Nakatomi Plaza, the setting of the first movie. There's very little in the way of story, but I quite like this a lot. The only real glimpse you get is seeing the limo pull up to the building and the title screen that John McClane took in the movie, as well as in the game over and game completion screens. In the movie, the shooting started on a higher level of the building, but in the game you start at the basement floor and you have to work your way up. I like this a lot too. In between each level, you're shown which floor you're on and how much more you have to go to reach the top. It gives you a visual idea of just how much of the game is left, and I do wish more games from this era showed that to the player. In total, there's 19 different levels for you to fight through, in addition to bonus stages. The bonus stages take you up to the roof where you have to defend hostages and get them on a helicopter as you kill more terrorists. The terrorists here will actively take shots at the hostages, so I found it useful to stick close by to them and fire on the terrorists as needed. Anyways, you'll be using a variety of weapons you find to blast terrorists with. Rifles, submachine guns, and grenades can all be picked up and used, but that's not to say that your starter pistol is bad. You can easily complete this entire game with just a pistol, but those weapon pickups add a bit of excitement and variety to the gunplay. The entire time you're fighting through Die Hard, you'll have an absolutely amazing soundtrack behind you playing. I'm not sure what genre you'd call this, but take a listen and judge for yourself. Yeah, it's awesome, right? In addition to the music, John will speak when picking up certain guns, power-ups, or completing a level. These range from his trademark Yippee Ki Yay or other tweaked lines from the movie like, "I got a machine gun." "I've got a machine gun." I love this, and it helps tie the player's actions to the movies with very minimal dialogue or exposition. Your movement in Die Hard is a bit tricky, but not too bad considering the time it was released. This game precedes the original DualShock controller by about a year, and so you'll be controlling John entirely with the D-pad and the buttons. You're able to move forward and back as well as rotate John with the D-pad. To strafe, however, you'll need to use the shoulder buttons. You're also able to roll out of a bad situation with the L2 and R2 buttons. It's a bit comical today to think about how differently old games handled controlling a 3D character in a 3D world, but Die Hard feels pretty good, all things considered. There's also a generous aim assist that targets enemies you're facing, which you can disable if you're into that, but personally I found it made the game much more fun and playable. Here's something else you don't see too often, that's here on the bottom right side of the HUD. This targeting system shows you which terrorist is actively aiming at you, and you can see John in relation to their crosshair. I didn't find too much use in this, honestly, as I just looked at John and his surroundings and I could could see who was aiming at me, but it's still pretty unique. I figured I should bring it up. Speaking on that HUD a bit, your health is displayed as a badge and it gets smaller as you take damage. You have a limited number of lives as well, but when you lose a life, you don't restart the level. You just keep on trucking until you've run out. Totally. When you run out, the game is over and you have to restart from the beginning. The game over screen is brutal as hell. You fail and the Nakatomi Plaza just explodes in this fiery cloud. It's brutal. Thankfully, the game does feature a password system where you can enter specific level codes if you want to restart from where you died last, but holy hell is this password screen long. Is this the longest password screen of all time? I timed this for the sake of this video and my god, this took me 303 seconds to type in, or just over 5 minutes. I might sound like I'm nitpicking, but Die Hard is a difficult game, and if you don't always want to restart at the beginning, you'll be putting in passwords a lot. I also found it to be a bit of a dull game after a while. You'll start seeing earlier levels repeated with different layouts for later levels. What I mean by this is that each level has a theme, like construction or office. Later on, as you progress past each themed level, you'll start seeing construction 2 or office 4. In total, there's 5 different themes spread across 19 different levels. 6 if you include the rooftop. Again, it's a nitpick, but I felt like I should mention it as you'll be seeing similar rooms as time goes on. For me, Die Hard is a really fun little game that doesn't take itself too seriously. It's worth at least one playthrough just to hear that banger soundtrack. Moving to Die Hard 2 Die Harder, this is where it gets really good. Die Harder is a light gun rail shooter where you have to kill the terrorists who have taken over Dulles Airport, just like in the second movie. In the second movie, however, very little shooting happens inside the airport itself, so the game has taken many liberties with the source material. Most of the DNA from the first game is here, but presented in a different genre. You're still shooting bad guys and not shooting good guys, but in first person. If you've ever played a rail shooter, you'll be right at home here control-wise. You're able to move the crosshair around the screen with the D-pad, fire on your enemies with the cross button, and reload with the shoulder buttons. The game won't automatically reload for you, so get used to pressing those buttons. Take it from me, it sucks taking unnecessary damage because you're an idiot and forgot to reload. The game also supports the PlayStation mouse, so if you have one of those laying around, that might be a cool alternative way of playing the game. Sadly, I don't have one of those, so I have no way of knowing if it's good other than the footage I've seen online. Honestly speaking, the controller is good enough, especially once you learn where to place your crosshair for the next scene. I'm at the point now where I can beat the entire game in one sitting with no resets on a controller. In addition to the pistol you start with, you're able to pick up rifles, launchers, grenades, shotguns, and other fun weapons. To pick up things in Die Harder, you'll have to shoot them as you would in any other light gun game. This adds a bit of complexity to the game. If you're not fast enough, you could miss out on a vital health pickup. Thankfully, Die Harder is a much shorter game than the first, with only 8 levels to play through and no repeats. You'll start in the airport, go underground the airport, onto the runway, on a snowmobile, around a church, and finally you'll finish off in the air shooting down helicopters and the plane. It's batshit crazy and I love the variety. Even though the game is shorter, that's not to say it's easier than Die Hard. I died quite a lot when I first started playing, but made steady progress with each replay. That's part of the fun of playing a really arcade-like experience like this, just getting further and further with each playthrough. If that's not your thing, you're also able to take advantage of the password system and skip levels or just replay that one level that keeps giving you trouble. You don't have lives anymore in Die Harder. Instead, it's been replaced by a maximum of 5 hits you're able to take, and that's represented once again by badges. Once you die, you're sent back to the beginning of the game, and it's time to start over. The music here is again phenomenal, but since there's far more explosions and gunfire going off than in the first game, it's drowned out by it. Honestly, there isn't much to dislike about Die Harder. It's fast, frantic, and a ton of fun. My only real complaint regarding this game in particular is the snowmobile level. I found that the screen moved around far too much and it made aiming difficult. So my suggestion to you is to go into it with as much health as humanly possible so you can afford more mistakes, because you will make them. Finally, we end the Die Hard trilogy with the third movie, Die Hard with a Vengeance. This is my least favorite movie out of the trilogy, but I believe this game is where they've taken the most liberties with the source material. In the film, John McClane and a civilian played by Samuel L. Jackson are led around the city on a wild goose chase. They have to get to certain locations in a limited amount of time to solve riddles to ultimately defuse bombs that terrorists have placed throughout New York City. So in the game, you're still defusing bombs, but there's no riddles to be had or anything like that. You're simply driving around the city, dodging traffic, and driving into cars that are rigged to explode or bombs that are laid throughout the town. There are some locations that are taken from the movie, like the park, but even then, I feel like that was a stretch. The guy who plays Samuel L. Jackson's character in the game is hilarious. They didn't even try to replicate him.
Go left up here.
Maybe they knew it was impossible, I don't know. But anyway, getting deeper into the gameplay, you're able to extend the time limit with pickups you find in the streets, as well as a turbo pickup that you can activate whenever you see fit. My issue isn't the time limit per se, but it's primarily the driving mechanics themselves. This is one of the most slippery, loose-feeling driving games I've ever played. It might look like Driver at a glance, but it plays nothing like it. Every car's turning radius feels like that of a bus, but then you can press the trigger buttons and do a quick 180 for whatever reason. I never quite got the hang of it, and this combined with the lackluster performance tested my patience, and ultimately I had to drop the game. Maybe this game was better back in the day, but for me nowadays, I just couldn't overcome the jank of steering a 3D car with a D-pad. With a Vengeance is my least favorite Die Hard movie out of the first three, and now it's my least favorite Die Hard Trilogy game as well. All in all, Die Hard Trilogy is a great package, even with its lackluster third game. Die Hard Trilogy sold well enough to be repackaged under the PlayStation's Greatest Hits label, and eventually got a sequel I'd like to talk briefly about. Die Hard Trilogy 2 Viva Las Vegas was released on February 29th, 2000 for PlayStation and March 8th, 2000 for PC. The game was developed by N-Space and published by Fox Interactive. At this point in time, there wasn't a fourth movie yet, so Viva Las Vegas has an original story featuring the character. The game features fully voice-acted and full-motion video cutscenes, which are always nice to see. The gist is that John McClane receives a call from a friend of his in the NYPD. His friend was just named warden of the Mesa Grande prison in Las Vegas, and so they're throwing a party that John is invited to. Of course, once John is there, a prison riot breaks out, and once again, John has to save the day. For me, the plot only existed to move the gameplay forward, and it never really interested me. The game does retain the three primary game genres from the first game, but instead decides to lay them out in a linear game as opposed to three smaller, separate ones. So for one or two levels, it might be a third-person shooter, then the next might be a driving section, for example. I believe the third-person shooter sections have seen the biggest improvements. Instead of having the same core gameplay loop where you take out a set number of bad guys each level, you now have set objectives you must complete. For example, you might have to find specific key cards to open doors, or you might have to open cells by pressing a button that's on the other side of the building. The enemy AI has improved as well. They'll rush at you, flank you, and some of them even patrol certain hallways until you aggro them. The gunplay itself is similar to the original game, but now you have analog controls. Thank you! For whatever reason, they didn't bind the camera controls to the right stick. In fact, the right stick does absolutely nothing, and the left stick acts like a glorified D-pad. It's a missed opportunity, and one I'm just not willing to forgive them for. In this game, like the first, you're able to pick up plenty of weapons, new and old, to use. My favorite addition to the roster is the shock rifle, which allows you to one-shot any of the common grunts in a single shot. Let's go ahead and move along and talk about the light gun sections, which unfortunately are a huge downgrade over the first game. Not only is the performance lackluster this time around, making aiming difficult, you now have to worry about hostages. Since they removed the scoring system from the game, killing hostages is now a condition that can cause a fail state. Again, you're a cop, I know you shouldn't be killing hostages, and I get it from that angle, but it makes the game so frustrating with its lackluster performance. I can't begin to tell you how many times I overcorrected my crosshair and shot a civilian in a panic to kill the guy shooting me. You're also given a health bar as opposed to the health system in the first game, so it's hard to tell sometimes just how many more shots you can take before you fail. Moving to the driving sections, these are less frustrating than the first games, but somehow they're still infuriating. You have a set time limit again, but thankfully it's not as strict this time around. Pickups are more plentiful, and the levels themselves seem more open and varied. The gameplay is shockingly similar to the first game though, where even the controls haven't been improved whatsoever. Guys, Driver, it's right there. Just copy it. They did it right. It's a good game. Just copy it. You'll be tasked with destroying cars, but you don't have any weapons of your own, so to do this you'll be just ramming the car in front of you over and over again. Not an issue on most cars, but some guys lay down mines and others shoot rockets at you. You can see how this could be an issue, and well, that's where I decided to draw the line and I put the game down. So let me explain that. I got to this point in the game where you're supposed to kill this boss to finish the level. The level itself isn't too bad. There are some beginner traps laid around, but they're easy enough to avoid after dying once or twice. The problem is that this boss is a tank, and he has a flamethrower, so not only will he take so many shots to kill, he'll also melt your health away. I died so many times to him. I think I replayed this level alone for about 40 minutes before I just said fuck it and put in an invincibility cheat just to progress. At this point I was burnt out and had hoped the game would ease up a little bit. Right after this level came a driving section where again it wasn't too bad until the very end. At the very end you're faced with taking down a car that shoots rockets rockets at you. The performance again was lackluster here, skipping all around as I attempted to follow this guy. Not only do you take damage from his rockets, but you take damage from hitting anything in the level too. I just couldn't beat the level and I had to put it down for now. I thought I was gonna throw something. I mean, I really struggled on this game. Maybe I'll go back and do a full video on the second game. Let me know if you're interested in seeing that, but for now I think I'm gonna put it down and leave it that way for the foreseeable future. I think the change in developer really hurt Die Hard Trilogy 2, and new developer N-Space had big shoes to fill, which I don't believe they did. The game is abysmal and a downgrade from the first in so many ways. By this point in time, we had better games in each genre like Siphon Filter, Twisted Metal, and Time Crisis to name a few. I can't help but feel like Die Hard Trilogy got passed by its successors and Fox Interactive just wasn't paying attention. In conclusion, Die Hard Trilogy is a fantastic title, and the fact that there are 3 games in one enhances the experience rather than detracts from it. Die Hard Trilogy 2 might not be a worthy sequel, but it doesn't take away from the first game's brilliance. It's a cheap game nowadays. I got my copy for $10, but don't let that fool you. It's worth every penny and then some. So I turn the question over to you. What's your favorite movie game? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be a shooter. I would love to read your replies. I try to read every YouTube comment. And with that, let's go ahead and roll the outro. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate your support. I enjoyed making this one a lot. Anytime I get to talk about a movie or game I love, it's always a breeze to put it down onto paper. Recommendation time. I'm gonna first recommend my Punisher video. It's a sweet third-person shooter based off the Marvel Comics character. I'm also gonna go ahead and recommend my Spec Ops: The Line video, another third-person shooter but with a crazy twist near the end. Very light spoilers in that one. So, as always guys, have a good one.